So the teaching today comes from chapter 11, From the Other Shore. Stars are consciousness. And the verse from the Heart Sutra is the 18 realms of phenomena, which are the 6 sense organs, 6 sense objects, and 6 consciousnesses, are also not separate self entities. And this chapter is a meditation on the unfolding of life through the senses. And in the sutras, we learn that everything is found within the 18 realms of elements composed of the 6 senses, the 6 sense objects, and the 6 consciousnesses, which together describe the realms of human experience. And so I found this interesting to look at. This is somewhat of a new teaching for me. So in addition to the 5 senses we usually think of, is also included the mind and objects of the mind and mind consciousness. And I thought it was interesting to think about sight as eye consciousness and hearing as ear consciousness and olfaction as nose consciousness. So I like this addition of the consciousness within the senses. But Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say that thanks to modern science, we now know that the universe is more than what we can perceive with the limited range of our human senses. For example, we know that there are many species of animals whose senses are far more sensitive than ours. Dogs pick up sounds humans cannot hear. We only have 3 color receptors in our eyes, while a mantis shrimp has at least 16 different color receptive cones in its eyes. And bats have a kind of sonar that allows them to know what is in front of them for up to 3 kilometers in the dark. Now, through technology, our human senses are being extended around the world. Here we are seeing each other from very different locations and across the whole of the electromagnetic spectrum, allowing us to see radiant nebulae only visible in the frequencies of radio waves. Our conditioning to think of our 6 sense organs as separate from each other is an inaccurate construction of the mind. Not one of these realms can exist by itself. Each can only interbe with every other realm. Inside the 18 realms, there is nothing that is permanent. Eyes are impermanent and always in the process of change. Form is always vibrating with energy, with the energy of heat and interacting with the environment, even if we can't perceive it directly. And in the process of seeing and sensing, our brain is renewing itself, establishing new neural connections, and reinforcing our weakening old ones. Nothing is fixed or static. In our usual way of thinking, there must be a doer in order for an action to be possible. So most of us believe that the eyes see, the nose smells. But we can come to understand that when eyes and form are in contact, there is where sight arises. And the eyes are just one component. Many conditions are actually necessary for sight to arise, like the presence of light, form, time, space, an optic nerve, and so on. As with the eyes, the other sense organs work in collaboration with their sense objects within the right conditions to bring about hearing, tasting, smelling, touch, thinking. Penetrating deeply, we understand there is thinking as a result of mind and object of mind, but there is no thinker. There is feeling, but the feeling and the one who feels are not separate. Neuroscientists now recognize our brain as a social brain. Without the environment, without interaction between, say, mother and baby, without other people, our brain will not become a human brain. All of our sense consciousnesses develop through interaction with the environment within the process of exploration. When we believe that our consciousness is subjective, that it rises from inside of us and goes out to be in touch with an objective world, we are caught in a dualistic way of perceiving. So when we look up at the night sky and we see the moon and the stars and the galaxies, we have to practice in order to see that they are not separate entities. Without consciousness, how can we see and know that the sun, the moon, and the stars exist? The stars and moon are consciousness. Consciousness is the stars and the moon. When we look at the moon and stars, we are seeing our own mind. Looking at the perceived, we see the perceiver. Our six sense consciousnesses and the six objects are not separate self-entities. They do not exist by themselves. Our sense consciousness and the object of our consciousness always arise at the same time. When we perceive this way, we begin to know the unity within all phenomena. And so at this point, I want to transition, and I felt very compelled to share some poignant examples of how our senses inter-are and how the sensor and the sense objects inter-are. And I just recently read this book, and so I'm taking these readings from experiences from Jacques Lusseron's life as he wrote about them in his memoir called And There Was Light. Jacques Lusseron was blinded at the age of 8, and he speaks to how his relationship with the senses was transformed once he became blind. He says, being blind was not at all as I had imagined it. People told me that to be blind meant not to see. How was I to believe them when I saw? I didn't see in the days immediately after the operation, for at that time I still wanted to use my eyes. I followed their usual path and looked in the direction where I was in the habit of seeing before the accident. One day I realized I was looking in the wrong way. I was looking too far off and too much on the surface of things. One day this revelation came in the Champ de Mars, where my father had taken me for a walk. I knew the garden well and naturally wanted to see it again, but I couldn't. At this point, some instinct made me change course, like a hand being laid upon me. I began to look more closely, not at things, but at a world closer to myself. looking from an inner place to one further within, rather than clinging to the movement of sight toward the world outside. Immediately, the substance of the universe drew together, redefined, and peopled itself anew. I was aware of a radiance emanating from a place I knew nothing about, a place which might as well have been outside me as within. But it was a fact. There was light. I felt an indescribable relief. I found light and joy at the same moment, and I can say without hesitation that from that day on, light and joy have never been separated in my experience. I have had them or lost them together. I saw light and went on seeing it though I was blind. I bathed in it as an element which blindness had suddenly brought much closer. I could feel light rising, spreading, and resting on objects, giving them form, then leaving them. The opposite of light was never present. At every waking hour, and even in my dreams, I lived in a stream of light. Without my eyes, light was much more stable than it had been with them. I saw the whole world in light. I existed through this light and because of it. And all the colors of the rainbow also survived. Light threw its color on things and on people. My father and mother, the people I met in the street, all had their characteristic color, which I had never seen before I went blind. Light was the whole reason for living. I let it rise in me like water in a well and rejoiced. The light, so continuous and so intense, was far beyond my comprehension. And then he shares, there were times the light faded, almost disappearing. It happened every time I was afraid, when I was angry, competitive, or impatient. The minute before, I knew where everything in the room was. But when the emotions arose in me, things went and hid in the most unlikely corners, mixed themselves up and muttered like crazy men and looked wild. I no longer knew where to put hand or foot. Everything hurt me. I could no longer afford to be jealous or unfriendly because as soon as I was, a bandage came over my eyes. A black hole opened and I was helpless inside it. But when I was happy and serene, approached people with confidence and thought well of them, I was rewarded with light. And here's a bit that he says about sound. How could have I lived without realizing that everything in the world has a voice and speaks? Not just the things that are supposed to speak, but the others, like the gate, the walls of the house, the shade of the trees, the sand, the silence. After I was blind, I could never make a motion without starting an avalanche of noise. I could hear the smallest recession in the wall from a distance, for it changed the whole room. Sounds had the same individuality as light. They passed through me neither inside nor outside. They gave me my bearings in space and put me in touch with things. It was not like signals that sounds functioned, but like replies. And I also want to share a bit that he talks about touch. At first, my hands refused to obey. When they looked for a glass on the table, they missed it. Fortunately, before long, I realized that instead of becoming useless, they were learning to be wise. Our eyes run over the surface of things. All they require are a few scattered points, since they can bridge the gaps in a flash. Eyes half see much more than they see, and they never weigh. They are satisfied with appearances, and for them the world glows and slides by, but lacks substance. Unlike eyes, my hands functioned in earnest. From whatever direction they approached an object, they covered it, tested its resistance, leaned against the mass of it, and recorded every irregularity in its surface. But most of all, having learned that they had fingers, my hands used them in an entirely new way. Movement of the fingers was terribly important and had to be uninterrupted, because objects do not stand at a given point fixed and confined in one form. They are alive, even the stones. What is more, they vibrate and tremble. My fingers felt the pulsation distinctly, and if they failed to answer with a pulsation of their own, the fingers immediately became helpless and lost their sense of touch. But when they went toward things in sympathetic vibration, they recognized them right away. And even more important than the movement of my fingers was pressure. If I put my hand on the table without pressing it, I knew the table was there, but knew nothing about it. To find out, my fingers had to bear down. And the amazing thing is that the pressure is answered by the table at once. Being blind, I thought I should have to go out to meet things, but I found that they came to meet me instead. I never had to go more than halfway, and the universe became the accomplice to all my wishes. As soon as my hands came to life, they put me in a world where everything was an exchange of pressure. I became part of what I was touching, and what I was touching became part of me. Give that a little